on learning from the arts and entertainment mediums to organize in the gig economy. We're going to go in the order in which we've indicated the speakers. So we're going to start with Paul Mishler of Indiana University. Paul has been a labor educator and a professor of labor studies in universities at Stony, University of Massachusetts, and now at Indiana University. He has taught in union halls and graduate seminars. He received his PhD in history and has written about labor history, American radicalism, and the history of childhood, which I find very, very fascinating. His book, Raising Reds, I'll talk to you more about this, Paul, Young Pioneers, Radical Summer Camps, and Communist Political Culture in the U.S., was published by Columbia University Press in 1988. Without further ado, Paul.
So, thanks for coming here. What you're going to see in the packet, I think I'm not going to read a paper. I'd rather have us sort of talk about stuff. But what I would have given in a paper is there to read it. And I'm going to sort of raise some points about why I came to this sort of issue, what I think some of the concerns are, and there are a couple of other things. This cartoon about the post-industrial Labor Day is a cautionary note. The Shrink Wrappers Amalgamated Association, I think it may exist now. And at the end, there's a sort of discussion of the development of the Models Alliance, which is the Union for Models in New York. And sort of, I think, is an example of a union that actually takes the kind of special concerns of their workforce very, very seriously. As you can imagine, models are subject to not only the general exploitation, but some very particular, usually gender-based exploitation as well. But the main thing is that being a teacher in working class universities over the last 25 years, one of the things I've noticed is that college graduate workers are rarely seen as workers by labor people. And that in kind of a rough way, although this may be painted with a too broad a brush, that many of us were brought up with the notion of the working class looking like they did in WEA posters from the 1930s and 1940s. And so we miss a working class which is all around us. The other thing and this is actually, I think, quite morally important, is that those of us who are activists have focused on the most exploited, or the most obvious exploited. Like low-wage service workers, agricultural workers, other forms of marginalized labor, but also who look very different. They're immigrants, they're homeless, they're sort of down and outers. And again, that kind of view prevents us from seeing the working class that's all around us, which include our students who have graduated and are working as baristas, Uber drivers, working at Gap selling clothing. And this is actually specifically true for where I see my students around working. Now, there are a couple of things about why don't they look like workers. One is they don't define themselves as workers. They don't want to be workers, right? They're not happy to get into the plant with the union and benefit plan like, people used to come out from Chicago to work at Studebaker in South Bend because you got in and you came out with a pension. And workers, Polish workers, German workers, Scandinavian workers, Black workers, Latino workers rode the rails from Chicago to get jobs at Studebaker in South Bend because that's what they got. So they wanted to be in the job. These people don't necessarily want to be in their jobs. What they have is something that my wife, an anthropologist, developed in her work on white-collar workers, are until jobs. And they're until jobs because I'm working until my novel gets published, until I get a job in university, until I start or finish graduate school, till, it's almost a variant of what women workers used to have until I get married, but it's still this kind of until my life turns to a place where the passions that I have now learned about because I've gone to a liberal arts college like SUNY or, where I've taught at Indiana University or UMass Amherst, I now have all this culture. I'm not using that word disdainfully. I like poetry. I listen to classical music. I've learned about jazz. I've done all this stuff. I'm not just the kid out of high school who's working drawing espressos at Starbucks, right? And so the aspiration, part of why they become invisible as workers is that we all tend to see their aspirational status rather than their structural status. And they see their aspirational status as being more important than their structural status. Now, my argument here is that that's not particularly relevant, because if you're earning $7.25 an hour and you're paying $200 a month student loans, you're poor. You don't look like a Mexican immigrant or a Haitian immigrant. You don't look like you've been homeless. You may look like you're a little bit more comfortable. You kind of dress. The clothing stores that sell to the kids at Stony and CUNY are the same clothing stores that you find in Harvard Square. So you look like the other people of your generation. So you're not set off, with the famous, I think it was Hobson essay on the workers' hat, Hobsbawm, the workers' hat in British labor culture. We don't have that. They're not set off by culture or by music or any other thing from others of their generation who are far more well off. And they also may not look at it because they're very, very dependent on the victories of the previous generations of the working class when they say, well, they're living at home. And we all say that in this kind of way, so God, what schmucks. How come they couldn't get together? What a failure to launch. And the whole popular culture makes fun of young people living with their parents as if these are the kids who just didn't have the gumption to get up and go. 45% of college-educated workers between the ages of 25 and 35 are living with their parents. It's the largest number in American history. Larger than even the point that people didn't leave their parents home until they got married and had land. They still moved out earlier than young people are now. So part of the argument, the first part of the argument, is that I want us to think of these workers as workers, and therefore deserving of our attention as people who are concerned with labor and working class issues. So we went to Starbucks for lunch. This was a harried group of factory workers. They weren't smiling. They weren't doing any of that Starbucks stuff you get in the downtowns. They were understaffed, overworked. They weren't happy. They were pissed off. And look, the only thing it reminded me was the factory. And I asked them, I said, well, who do you work for? So they don't work for Starbucks. They work for sort of multinational mega food corporation that contracts with SUNY as if you get Starbucks wages and benefits. So now Starbucks would all take a big deal that they paid all the education benefits. No, we don't get paid. We're not getting paid by Starbucks. We're getting paid by mega food corporation. So they're getting paid minimum wage, working on a campus, overworked, understaffed. And somehow we think there's something wrong with them, even against our better natures. Right? We wouldn't say that when we look at coal miners. What did they do wrong to end up here? Nobody ever said that in Appalachia or the British Midland. No, you don't say, God, if they only had made better choices in their lives. But we do say that about Starbucks workers. And I want to get us to sort of turn that around. Now, for Paul and Maggie, Paul, one of the reasons that I'm here is because Paul is one of my older friends that we've known since before you can talk about it. Used to do political work together in Cambridge, right?
Yeah, way back now.
Luckily,
back in the day.
luckily we look exactly the same as we did when we were 20.
At least we can tell each other.
Right. So
we're still friends.
But I think it's, I know these people who work in the arts and entertainment unions, and I know people who are working in the arts and entertainment unions, both union and non-union, and I know that students who are doing until work have artistic aspirations, right? Because nobody says, God, I'm so proud of it. People say, I'm proud of it. I get t-shirts, auto workers, Teamsters. Nobody has a t-shirt that's, God, I'm so proud I'm a Starbucks worker, unless they're made to do it by their employer, right? They do that at the cafes. You have to wear one of the things. Isn't it great to be a Starbucks worker? But nobody goes out to the 4th of July picnic with a t-shirt saying, yeah, that's me, I'm a Starbucks worker, right? So one of the things that struck me was that the language of the gig economy comes from the arts. Even the term gig is a word from the arts. Day job comes from the arts. And I said, well, maybe there's something to this, that maybe we could learn something about organizing if we sort of took away the model of Detroit or Chicago, these big factories with thousands of workers, and they won the packing houses, they won the auto industry. They won it in one fell swoop, and everybody was sort of marching in lockstep. What about workers who worked in Detroit or Chicago or Gary or wherever the same is a big industry? And so we have the arts unions, which have been around for a long time.
and have had a different kind of model, having to deal with many of the same problems that young people are now facing. Multiple employers, temporary employment. What do you do in between the times you're working? Are you really a musician if you only had one gig in the last 3 weeks? Maybe you're really a dishwasher in the cafeteria. And how do you deal with senses of identity if work is so unstable? Right? Coal miner said, I'm a coal miner. No way else I could be anything else, right? I went to a rally of retired coal miners and their widows, right? All male work and lots of widows around because it was very, and they in their entire lives were nothing but coal miners and coal miners' wives. The new economy for young workers is not like that. And so musicians, actors, other people in the arts and entertainment industries are sort of in similar positions. So those are the questions. There's other kinds of things you can see. There's some discussion questions if your tongue is tied. There's an article about the Models Alliance, as I said, where, one of the new, you look at Vogue magazine and say, God, these are what privileged workers, and you look at the stuff from the Models Alliance, and that's privilege, not quite. Especially if you didn't make it to Vogue. What if you still work around the edges? Another issue for the arts and entertainment industries, a lot of people waiting on the outside trying to get in. And so that another similar part of the gig economy is that good jobs look like they're out there, but the proportion of people who have good, stable jobs in our economy is actually quite small. So, Paul Frank, who was the assistant organizing director.
Was the organizer. You're demoting me already?
I thought he said assistant.
Paul, shall I?
Well, sure.
Yes, I
you
have a little intro for you.
She won't make the mistakes I will.
Maybe actually the other Paul should do that since you've known him for so long. But Paul Frank is a self-described washed-up jazz musician who taught the organizing bug as a teenager, who caught the organizing bug as a teenager when he first became involved in community organizing. He's been a union organizer and educator for more than 30 years. Paul was the founding director of organizing and education at the American Federation of Musicians, where he coordinated organizing campaigns and educational programs for the International Union, having previously served as organizer and business representative at AFM Local 802 in New York City. Paul also served as the deputy director of organizing for CSEA Local 1000, I cannot read acronyms, AFSCME, where he coordinated comprehensive campaigns to organize over 2,500 direct care workers in the private sector in New York City, as well as hundreds of workers in municipal government, libraries, school districts in Long Island and Hudson Valley. Currently, Paul is a consultant with Walker Associates, where he advises unions and community organizations on organizing and strategic campaigns. Recently, he has been working with the building trades and community organizations in Westchester County to build local community coalitions that advocate for responsible development.
Long-winded way of saying I'm washed up yet. And that's
What he really wanted to do.
What I really want to do. So what I'd like to do is just throw out a little bit kind of a context here, which is, what is the importance of the arts and entertainment movements? Why are we talking about it at all? And I'll kind of submit to you that I think, in many ways, these unions should be the leaders of our labor movement. After all, we can inspire as well as inform. We are in a situation in which culture and art is so important in any kind of struggle and resistance, especially these days. And historically, that's always been the case. I mean, whether it's the Greeks saying you can't have empathy without art, Bertolt Brecht saying you can't separate art and culture from justice and equality, or Nina Simone saying the duty of an artist is to reflect one's times. So I want to place us there, because for me, as a musician, washed up or not, what was important about looking at this whole question and really dealing with many of these issues for really many, many years was this whole idea of what is the role of the artist and the problem artists identify themselves as workers. Because the flip side of this, of course, is artists themselves saying I'm not working. My relationship to my employer is not that of a worker, even though, of course, most of the time it is. So I think when we think about all these questions, one thing that we've been living with as musicians, and I think also as actors, as writers, and Maggie will talk about the actors, although Maggie also works with the musicians union, so she's going to have you more updated, is the question of well, two things. One is the constant misclassification of workers over decades, from employee to independent contractor. You know, under the National Labor Relations Act, you have to be an employee and have an employee relationship to your employer, right? And this idea of beginning to essentially undermine that and place people who are workers in the independent contractor category, legally or not, is really what's been kind of part of the employers or the bosses' plans for years. And unfortunately, musicians were kind of like the canary in the mine. We were confronted with this very early, as you can imagine, all the casual work we have with many different employees that we deal with, and even in a given week. But it was here where the resistance did not take place, where even major policy and laws came down, in which the musicians in particular, I want to talk about them really, did not resist to find a way to do this, particularly about how to keep organizing. And I'll just tell you a quick story. When I walked into Local 802 in the late 80s as a young, enthusiastic company we were going to organize, and I was already organizing clubs and restaurants, and someone took me aside and said, well, you need to think about something called the Caribbean Club Musician. And I said, great. Why Puerto Rico? Puerto Rico is supposed to be great. And what that was in a nutshell was a decision that was made. It was the bosses got together down in Puerto Rico in hotels and worked with some folks who were musicians who were fronting for them. And just so to give a context, back in those days, certainly most up to that time, hotels would have bands that were all employees. You were the band at the Hilton, you were the band at the Marriott, you were the band at the Pierre, and you were an employee, just like the dishwashers the folks who, the bellhops. And so it became clear to this band of folks that we could start to kind of chip away at that. After all, musicians aren't really employees, right? They work for a band leader, they're hired by the band leader, they bring their own tools, all this kind of BS criteria that between the IRS and NLRB have been promulgated, and it was put together into a case in which they essentially challenged the status of the house band of the Caribbean Hilton in Puerto Rico. We've been the house band for about 50 years. And took the case in NLRB. And if you all know him, the National Labor Relations Board is no place for workers in general. But I'll submit to you that this is probably one of the best decisions the NLRB ever made. Because it basically went down this whole question of what is an employee versus a independent contractor. And eventually looked at that decision. Okay, I mean, point by point, excellent case. Laid out General Counsel. It got appealed to the Second Circuit in New York. Second Circuit in New York, whose jurisdiction is Puerto Rico, who's known as kind of progressive, came out with a terrible decision. What was the result of this? They ruled against it and said, in fact, these musicians were all independent contractors, and the boss was not the hotel, the boss was the band leader. Number one, how do you organize against the band leader? Number two, after all these years of precedent, what is going on here? The employer is totally out the hook, and we all of a sudden overnight, all across the United States, have a bunch of musicians who are employees who are now independent contractors with no rights, who can only get rights theoretically by organizing against the band leader, which is not going to do, and all of a sudden the world changes for the musicians. So the idea of organizing single restaurants and bars, you can imagine if all the bars in Williamsburg and familiar with New York City were organized, all of that goes out. Now I entered only two at a time, the progressives had taken over, they kicked out the old guard, and they were organizing. But even then, so what does that kind of challenge mean? And I think the main thing, we can talk about the different things that weren't done, but it wasn't taken seriously as the beginning of something that would affect a lot more than just the musicians. The entire economy. Again, gig economy, casual work, those are our terms. So the musicians were in a position, after having history of striking against technological advancement and all these other things, but sitting there saying, okay, this means a whole lot more to us. I mean, to everybody and to us, but we must have a plan to deal with this. And of course, as any law, there's lots of ways of getting around that. But I think for our discussion, what we have to understand is that that is the context and basis for the struggle to organize, you know, what we call casual workers or as you pointed out, kind of the new working class. I think we can talk later on about some of the lessons about how to organize, but we've leaving this before handing over to Maggie. It doesn't matter really in the sense of whether you're an arts and entertainment union or not. Unions need to organize. If they're not organizing, they're not going to live. And organizing these days must be community-based comprehensive campaigns, where you're doing the research, you're understanding the bosses as the enemy, you create leverage, and you create, you know, essentially a structure of support and power in the community to support those workers. Understanding musicians are musicians by day, as coal miners are, but they're members of the PTA, they're the bowling league, they're part of churches. This is all part of, and this ain't rocket science. People have been talking about this for years, but unions have been ignoring it. So I'll leave you with, and you kind of notice I like quotes. You know, just for your sake, Howard Zinn, the great historian, used to say, I get my best lines from bumper stickers. And his favorite bumper sticker was, if God wanted us to vote, she would have given us candidates. Right. So I'm kind of sad about quotes, but I'll leave you with one by Alice Walker, because it really describes not only the musicians who like, but everybody that we're now facing in terms of labor movement is the most common way people give up their powers is when they don't have it. The musicians have had tremendous power for years and have never figured out a way, I would say in a long-term sense. There's been spurts and spurts of great campaigns to really utilize all that power to move not only their agenda, but the agenda of the people and the working class.
Maggie, I'm going to introduce you briefly. Maggie Russel-Brown has been the labor organizer for 14 years. She got her start with SAG-AFTRA through the WAVE program in the early 2000s. She learned the mechanics of organizing successful NLRB campaigns, and then quickly learned the NLRB is deeply flawed, and began studying power as it relates to organizing. Most recently, she was the organizing director for local 802 AFM and is currently the organizing director for the Eastern region for SAG, do you pronounce it AFTRA? SAG-AFTRA. Without further ado, Maggie.
What SAG-AFTRA stands for?
Yes, it's two unions that merged in 2012. SAG is the Screen Actors Guild, you know, the SAG Awards, probably the most watched union event in the world. And AFTRA is the American Federation of Radio and Television Artists. And there are two unions that merged in 2012. They tried to merge for 30 or 40 years because employees were putting them against each other. While SAG is traditionally entertainment, AFTRA had some entertainment, but we're the highest density of our broadcast journalists and broadcast journalists. And so I think, you know, we're talking about workers as it relates to freelance employees, 1099, true 1099 employees, and W-2 employees, which is really important when it comes to organizing. If you want to organize freelance 1099 employees and they're actually for real freelance 1099 employees, you're going to get into 1099 trust issues, which is sometimes also, you know, could be considered priceless. And so bosses will always threaten you with that. I think the most recent example would be the casting directors on Broadway. If anyone has seen the news about casting directors, who want to organize casting directors, these are the people that cast the shows, right? They're some of the only workers on Broadway who don't have a union. And the Broadway League said, well, they're independent contractors, and they can't organize. And the union said, no, they're not. And the Broadway League is suing the union for antitrust violations right now. And we'll see how that plays out. I think it's going to be really important in the larger context of what is happening in the gig economy, in the labor movement, people scrambling to try to really figure out this question. You know, as I think about casual employees, they still exist, or they do exist. It's something new on the broadcast side. Anybody listens to NPR, National
Univ, DC, and then there's a whole back end of producers who, some of whom, about 70% are full-time employees who enjoy benefits and can raise a family, and we represent them. And then there's about 30 to 40% who are casual employees, right, that are keeping the entire industry afloat. What's interesting about them is that the employers haven't made them 1099 yet, right? I would imagine they're going to try to very soon. I mean, why wouldn't they? You save a lot of money. Have payroll taxes, you don't have responsibilities for a whole host of issues that you would with a regular employee. And I think in terms of power, the entertainment industry is probably the last industry in the United States that has so much labor power. I mean, they can shut this down like that. From the stagehands that run the entire production, to the actors, I mean, the power, the idea of how much power they wield is incredible, and it's reflected in the wages and working conditions of these workers, right? I mean, if you think about a television show, you think about, the actors who are making hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars an episode, right? But there's an entire back end apparatus of working class people who call themselves working class people, right? My partner is one of them, who are making incredible livings doing this work, right? Because the industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and they can shut it down, right? And they're the ones who are day players, casual employees, have 100 different employers in a year, right? But they band together and they won't work. And I think I actually heard this recently when somebody comes, a new production comes into town and they want to do something non-union. IATSE members SALT. I don't know if anybody knows what salting is, right? It's when members or workers go into an employer, get a job, they start working, and then day two they walk off until they get their union contract. And that's how they maintain their standard of working, in their working conditions.
Just so people know, IATSE is the station.
It's station, yeah, International Association of
Theatrical and Stage Employees.
There we go, yeah. And there's a lot of acronyms in the labor movement. I've been here.
That's how you know you're in the label. Just they flow trippingly off your tongue.
The fact that I can say that is really very simple.
And,
They're classics, don't worry.
flashcards. I'll tell this last story about my time in the musician union, and I had organized a studio in Manhattan called Avatar Studios. Avatar no longer exists. Studios are leaving, that's a different question. Had a bunch of assistant engineers. These are the people that when somebody, Bruno Mars, goes in to record an album, these are the workers at the back end making sure the album sounds good. Engineers are super important to the process. And they had organized. They were making quite literally minimum wage in one of the highest end studios in the country. Super famous studio. It's where Michael Jackson recorded. It's where Sting recorded. I mean, this is the most famous studio. And they organized, and we won the election, maybe a dozen workers. And the thing about organizing in this country is you can't just win an election. Right? You don't win a union until you get a first contract. And so we were in the first contract campaign, and we knew that the workers had said the most stable gig of the year was the Tonys. And the Tonys were important because musicians who played in orchestra for the Tonys were stationed actually at Avatar, and there was fiber optic cable that connected it to the theater, and so we were hearing like the cue music, right? These were live musicians, and they were literally at Avatar, right? And it was connected with fiber optic cable. At the time, the communication workers were on strike with Verizon. Verizon has the only fiber optic cable network in New York City, and we were like, this is it. We could really disrupt this whole thing by just calling for a strike vote 2 days before. And we ramped up the campaign by talking to the musicians who were in the union, talking about the issues, and they were wearing stickers to rehearsals and supporting the Avatar workers. And we didn't even put this thing officially. We dropped a piece of paper in strike authorization vote. It wasn't even a strike vote. It was a strike authorization. That's an important dispute. And all hell broke loose, right? I didn't even really understand what exactly was happening. All of a sudden, the Broadway League, whoever, airs it, ABC, CBS, everyone was freaking the fuck out. Right? And they actually ended up moving the live orchestra, right? And we got what we wanted, right? But it was this vein of the entertainment industry that you could just poke. Yeah, not even really do anything, just like flick it.
Because the stakes are so high.
Because the stakes, there's so much money. Right.
Okay, that's power.
I guess that's power. Yeah. And yeah. That's the risk, right? Yeah.
Do you want to transition now or build on this to get to?
Well, let's say there's some questions,
You can take questions,
and then we'll come back to us.
Well, we're going to take questions, but you raised, Paul, an important point that I think we should come back to at some point, which is what are the lessons learned? What are the strategies and tactics that we can use to leverage this knowledge that you have? So, yes, questions.
Yeah, really fascinating open thoughts. I think going back to something that this Paul said at the start, I think it's important to realise that the working class never look like they do on WBA courses, right? Like my friend Laura Schwartz, who's a British historian, is fond of talking about the fact that when Marx wrote Capital in London in the 1860s, the biggest section of employment by numbers, it wasn't textiles, it wasn't manufacturing, it was domestic service, right? In Marx's terms, unproductive labour, and Marx would talk about it. And I think it's really important, historically and in the present, to challenge these ideas of what the working class looks like, or what the working class should look like, which is very often overdetermined by gender and race and everything else. So yeah, and I just wanted to briefly talk as well in the context of organising the gig economy. I don't know if there's any other Brits here, but there's been a lot going on, particularly in London, with the organisation, particularly on university campuses actually, of cleaning staff, security staff, who are most often outsourced, like the Starbucks staff here, and organising, creating their own unions outside of the established TUC unions, the main unions in the UK, and getting victories, and similar things. The first ever McDonald's workers' strike in the UK started a couple of months ago. Cinema works in London as well, and I think there's a lot to learn from them as well.
Should we collect some more questions, or you want to go ahead and respond?
Let's hear from everybody.
What is all this mean for adjunct? Right? So like, that's my first and foremost question. I work for two colleges. I am a contract employee, despite the fact that I have worked for temporary worker, even though I've worked for them for 5 years. What does that mean, right? So well, I mean, I actually happen to be doing a little work with the Professional Staff Congress, which is the union for CUNY faculty, staff, and really only adjuncts. So I can't kind of share great knowledge about that. But I think that, again, if we get back to describe the situation, it's very similar. It's the model we've been talking about in terms of what the university is now taking on, both to deal with how they want to spend, not spend money, but also take the power from those who are actually move the world around, like a janitor or a gadget, right? So
and I think because adjuncts are faculty and they're not janitors and they don't work in the cafeteria, but they're also, we're put in this hole of not also being faculty too. We're something else. We're somehow with or failed faculty. And there's this lack of class consciousness there, and we just don't know where we are.
Yeah, you're always workers with that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I think
You're gonna tell that somewhere.
but what I'm going to say is that you have probably more in common with that janitor than you think. A lot of adjuncts don't see, they aspire to, and of course you aspire to become a professor, all that, but when you start talking about doing something about this problem, you've got to figure out where you are and who you are and who your allies and who aren't. And begin to organize, showing those common kinds of experiences and in this sense, relationship to the boss. Right? I think the thing about adjuncts is, again, relationship with the boss, and the janitor is an employee. You're not, for the most part. So if you're unionized, for example, between the adjuncts, and I'm really not, are organized, and they're considered employees, but not in the same, obviously, the same capacity. The ones who aren't organized are obviously temporary casual workers.
One of the issues does seem to be, there's sort of a question here, which is what for adjuncts about whether they actually want to wipe out the job category itself, right? So that one would think that what we really want is there to be no adjuncts, which is a very complicated position for unions to deal with. And although deep in the hearts of many adjuncts, I think very few would say, this is cool. I don't want one of those tenure track jobs, right? So that in some way that there's this kind of, so you say, well, being an adjunct and be proud runs against the current of saying we want to be something else.
Also, that you're oppressed if you're an adjunct faculty member.
Which is the other part of it, right? So,
And socially as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
And
not.
oppressed by admittedly by tenured and contract faculty.
Yeah, it's total false consciousness.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable.
But you raise this really important
but I think part of it of thinking about workers is saying, I'm really interested in breaking the model of thinking that the normal is lifetime single employers. As say, people came to South Bend to work at Studebaker and they were expected to get jobs from us. One of the first factories I worked in, I had to lie about being a student, and I'm here for it. And at 19 years old, they started talking about my pension, and I sort of had this internal look of horror. You think I'm going to be here when I'm 65? This is crazy. But that model as normal, which is becoming less and less possible, means that I think adjunct unions are caught between sort of saying we shouldn't have them, we should expand the number of line faculty, or we are a permanent part of the current university. Now, what that means in public sector, I think, and this is where I think some of the real struggle is that around education, the fight against the defunding of education becomes a central issue of organizing. That as much as the full-time faculty might be jerks, they don't really control who has the funding, and whether there are going to be additional lines also doesn't depend on the faculty, and sometimes doesn't even depend on the administration. I mean, administration tend to be lackeys, but I know in Indiana, the legislature is cutting 20% of the university budget every year for the last 10 years. The lying that goes on by the administration is when they throw up their hands and say, we don't know why this happened. Right? That's dishonest. And when senior faculty say that, that's dishonest. Because it's in the public record. But the winning of that battle, I think, is about expanding public services. I tell you, Indiana had a shortage of teachers. And they spent $2 million for a study on why people aren't going into teaching. I would have done it for the price of a cup of coffee. Low wages, being beaten up in the press, big classes, and job insecurity. That's $1.50, maybe $3.50 at Starbucks. But what would they like to do is pay other people like themselves to study why, when you're beating up a group of workers, people don't want to go into that trade anymore. So part of it is that at the top, university administrators are just like corporate bosses. I mean, they are implicated. Faculty aren't so much, although they like to think they are sometimes. That's where false consciousness is, because they're just getting paid wages also. But I think that issue of whether we want to wipe it out, so that the old adjunct, which is, as Tom calls it, Al Einstein comes in from Princeton and teaches a physics class because people want to know what the big guy has to say about something, and he gets paid $50. Good. Everybody else now, who we get a PhD, and you're $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in debt, and you're blamed. Why don't you choose something different? Well, I'll choose something different. I can go into industry where the factories are closing and there are no jobs, right? What should I have done? You could have been an entrepreneur. That's what, in Indiana now, in the whole university, there are 35 faculty members assigned to entrepreneurship. Right? 98% of our population work for wages, and there are 8 faculty members in labor So these people are encouraging entrepreneurship, right? 50% of all small businesses fail every year. The 50% that doesn't are usually doctors' offices, which are economically small businesses, but are not socially small businesses, right? The small businesses that survive depend on enormous levels of free labor, particularly children, right? Even though child labor is outlawed in America, except if you live in food family, right? So if your dad's your boss, everything's cool. If your dad's not your boss, then you're a child labor, right? So this is what 35 faculty members, full-time, tenure-track, paid more than humanities faculty members like me, paid nearly twice as much as the wrong business school, right, are teaching what is outright bullshit, to be frank. And they're doing it because that's what the people who run the state want to hear, right? So that we want people to be working. We want to wipe out. I think we want to wipe out ethics. We want to open up lines. We need more English teachers. We need more history teachers. We need more politics teachers, more theater teachers, more painting teachers. Everything we need more of. Right? I tell my students what it was like to be at a state university in the 1970s in Massachusetts, and there's jaws dropped. There's practically no tuition. We had, every time somebody had an idea, they let them run a class, whether it's 5 students or 50, and it's sort of like, it's like a utopian novel or something. Sort of, their eyes get all dreamy and say, oh, and there were unicorns there too? You know, it's like, but this was under Nixon, for Christ's sake. The only thing that's changed is their ability to fight back, I think.
And yeah, sorry, forgive me for asking stupid questions because I'm not from here, but I don't know what the structure of sort of union organisation or union density is in universities here. But so in the UK, if adjuncts are in a union, it's going to be the University and College Union, which is the same as the permanent staff, and obviously the union officials are usually permanent staff with secure jobs who don't really give a shit about people who are on temporary contracts or part-time contracts or sort of 0 hours contract often. And the recent strike in the UK, which you might know about, for all the good things it did, which were thrown away by leadership, but for all those, it brought these tensions to a head in quite interesting ways, I'm not sure in productive ways, but also those tensions again with the outsourced staff, the cleaners and the service staff. And so when we're thinking tactically, I'm wondering if it's worth thinking about whether these sort of sectoral unions are something we should keep or something we should chuck away, right? Because I think they tend to encourage this kind of labour aristocracy that you were talking about before, and might it be worth thinking about organising not in terms of what a job is, but what our workplace is and who our employer is, which is really the important social relation.
Yeah. I mean, I sat a little bit into the union hall and membership meeting, listening to musicians upset about this is the translation ever, low-class stagehand getting paid to do this while they didn't get a raise. And then not making the connection of what's happening there, right? Or even being told that musicians aren't workers, right? Even though some musicians are like, yeah, I'm trading my labor for money. That's work. And so I think there is that problem in the labor market. There is absolutely that problem.
And to go with that, we haven't talked about, particularly about race, in the sense of how you divide and conquer and how bosses, just naturally normally work. In the context of, in particular, musicians, we ran a campaign in the 90s where the major recording companies, at that time going 5, had Latino subsidiaries which they refused to acknowledge the city. We ran a whole nationwide campaign around the question of, it wasn't just Latino, but anybody who records Latino in the industry. At that time, you have to remember it was Selena had just been murdered. It was Ricky Martin's uptick in Latin music here, at least in terms of popularity and business. And what we found was kind of similar to your story, is even within musicians and within the folks at work, understanding that music and those folks who do it. And long story short, we kind of won, we kind of didn't, because as usual, the union cut a deal that wasn't really, in the long term, one that should have occurred. But there was a win. But here's the situation. We had writers, artists, elected officials, unions, everybody from all over the country. It was a real coalition. We worked 5 years on this. But again, the consciousness of what this meant for Latino issues, but also for, in terms of understanding demographics of the country, and bringing all the workers together that worked on that. Because it wasn't just musicians, it was, again, the engineers, the community, everybody who was part of this. And we made it an issue of the music, not just of the musicians. And still there was this whole question of, as we're raising here, about where do I stand? Who am I and where do I stand in this moment? Whether a musician or a worker, that's really, to put it in simple terms, who am I and where do I stand in the world? And within the context of the labor movement, that's a really, unfortunately, complicated goddamn question. It shouldn't be. Right? It continues to be exploited. I mean, I've been working with the building trades, and you know about the building trades. You know, we were joking. I'm in a meeting and we're talking about organizing. We spend 5 hours talking about the enemy within. Everybody's screwing each other, and then we finally get to the employer, and we're too tired to talk about that. And that's the hardest part, because you have to organize the employer. So I think the question of sectoral, all these issues about how unions have been divided, the history in this country of craft unionism versus, one big union, the Wobblies, all of this has been a tension issue, CIO, and then that whole falling apart of CIO. All this has been an issue that's really been, at this point, you could say, kind of chalked up to a win by the employer. However, it is one place, and I think unions here, for me, it's really important to point this out, is that it's still arguably the best anti-poverty program in the country. And it brings people together, particular people of different colors and races together, and backgrounds, like no other movement. And it's why it's been so attacked, and why even after all these years of being attacked and having poor leadership and making really bad decisions, it still is here and thriving and must thrive. I'll just tell you one. There's so many stories of the moments that are important, that are 5 minutes. I'll give you one for the musicians. You'll like this. Back in the 80s, we approached our leadership and said, listen, the DJs are taking over. They're doing all the weddings. We should organize the DJs. The DJs are not only our competition, but they're us. This is like just as rap and hip-hop was really taking off. And it was a simple conversation. No. So that 5-minute conversation changed probably essentially the whole direction of that union. Because imagine if we organized DJs and what it would meant to the entire music industry. So it's lack of vision, lack of understanding, cowardice, we can run right down, but lack of imagination and creativity from the goddamn arts and entertainment. So I think this is kind of a big contradiction that we have found in working inside. Is all those incredible number of missed opportunities that were not big debates, that were 5 minutes, and including in my union, the AFM, which was a segregated union for years. You'll see now local numbers that are 2 numbers because they were merged black and white locals, forced to merge by the Justice and Fire in the early 70s, as they were segregated union. And unfortunately, what happened is when they were merged, the white unions took over from the black unions for the most part. And of course, right? So this is a whole history of our own, our own divisions and our own, issues in terms of living in this country and what capitalism and the system, has us essentially work within and all of that. That's still a big struggle. I'm hopeful that as this stuff gets more and more acute, the contradictions, that these things are becoming, young folks are taking this on, unlike any other generation. Not only because they have to, but because they're much more creative and open about understanding these issues. So I think that's kind of part of what you were talking about.
One more answer about the difference between the U.S. and the British academic system, and you can see where there's problems with faculty organizing here, is that in the UK, the way I understand it, you become an employee. And once you become an employee, you're sort of under what are essentially job security laws, right? It's really hard to get fired.
But not if you're in the position that I'm in, for example,
No, not if you're a casual worker, but once you get into the permanent system, it's very hard to fire you.
Yeah.
What we have is the tenure system, which means that by the time most young faculty, let's say the small group that gets a tenure track, and they get to the tenure process, and let's say they get tenure, they're so beaten down and so foreign and so frightened. I mean, it's like 19th century Dickensian caricatures if you look at post-tenure faculty. They're so frightened and so lost because the process is so onerous. And yet we hold on to this as if this is an expression of our control over our work, because it comes under quote faculty governance. Say, well, why don't we change it? Why don't we have a job security system? You have lecturers, and being a professor is sort of an honorific, but it's not like you work for 7 years and they can fire you.
Well, I mean, increasingly,
They can.
Increasingly what's happening is not that they can fire you, but that you'll be employed on a contract of 1 year or 3 years or 5, often.
It won't get a permanent position.
Yeah, often, forever, and like moving around the country, So, and I think the sort of that sort of the transience of that means it's really hard to organise, right? Because if I'm in one place for, it's usually not even a 12-month contract, it's a 9-month contract, so you have to find other work in the summer, right? So I'm not going to get involved in my local branch of the union if I'm not going to be around.
Right, unless when we look back on sort of the notion of carrying your union with you rather than having it based on the geography of the workplace, right? And that's one of the things that's interesting about sort of what in arts and entertainment is, where you work for whatever, like 25 employers, and you're carrying your card with you. But there's problems, right? Because these unions organize the employers. This is true for the building trades. They don't see that they don't organize workers; they organize employers, right? They organize employers to accept their card, right? They don't organize workers to become union. They organize employers to only hire union workers. So there are strategic and tactical parts about that I think are difficult. I'm going to go back a little bit. A question I have, and whether you have ideas about it, is this notion of the aspirational universe in which young workers live. The change and adjuncts are very much a part of that. It's the aspiration toward being a full-time faculty member fits into very much in the conception of what people are as workers. And I think for many college-educated young workers, there's this aspirational, imaginative universe they live in. That, you say, oh, you should join the Starbucks union. So, well, I really hope I'm not it's not like I'm not going to be this for very long, which is maybe fanciful. But I don't want to think of myself that way. I think of myself as a budding novelist. I think of myself as a potential graduate student. I think of myself, it's very similar to what used to be said about women workers, right? I think of myself as a potential wife. There's this notion of the aspirational imagination, which union organizing, and the traditional unions have always said this is a problem, right? It's why unions would organize women in the 20s and 30s. They're not staying in the workforce. They're just going to go off and pick. Why should we use union resources for workers who are only going to stay for a couple of years? Which was in some places true, in some places not, by the way. But their attitude was, this was a temporary workforce. We're going to get nothing back from them. So there's the practical part of it, but there's also the sense of, how do you go to a worker and say, we want you to think of yourself as a worker, not as a worker full stop, but as a worker who's a fuller human being. And I think that's where the American labor unions, not on their own, I think this is part of the law, right? Taft-Hartley and even the National Labor Relations Act has essentially told unions they can't deal with workers as human beings, right? It's part of the legal structure in which labor relations in the United States has developed. So you can care about that. But at this point with this group of workers, I think you have to care about this. So you have to say, well, I know you want to do this, or I know you're going to go here, or, can the union be an institution that serves the entire person of the worker? This is what the UAW did in the early years, right? This is where they had a hall where you got married, they had a health system where you had, when your baby was born, your wedding anniversary, you had it at the hall.
Breakfast and lunch programs, social programs.
Everything was, so when you said you're UAW, you were Detroit, in 1955, you were living in a world, right? So they were able to create it, but it's, what are we going to do now with these Starbucks workers where I had lunch are living? I worked in factories, I wasn't working like that. I worked in unionized factories, we didn't have to work like that, right? These workers were not happy, right? And what do we say to them? Or
other temporary workers, or even temporary workers who are doing what they like, that it's important to find ways of acting collectively.
Let me just say, there's a direct correlation, I think, between those community unions and when unions stop organizing. These are community organizing. This is organizing. There's a direct relationship about when unions decide to kind of adopt a business union approach. Oh, let's spend a lot of money on politicians so we can change labor law. We can make it better legal. Again, right? And that's what many of the unions now are still doing, even though they talk about the definition of insanity. But this idea that we can somehow, and then you think, well, even that's an idea. How do you think you can change labor law without having power from the ground and base? You have to organize. So I think it really gets back to this whole question of when unions were organizing and really doing that work and creating all this community, you can see when that stopped and when this kind of new business unionism kind of took over and prevailed, even against sometimes the wishes of that, the insurgency of the rank and file. Anyway, we can hear from some other folks who.
Kind of, yeah. Somebody else from Britain as well. Another one of us. Just what kind of people point was made over there, with the strike in Britain, which I don't know how much people know about the strike that happened over pensions, after pensions recently. It's kind of an interesting example. I'm glad somebody mentioned the lobbying versus craft unionism, because although the academic sector full-time staff in Britain is pretty highly unionised, the pension system works differently depending on whether you're working for an older, more established university, called the Russel-Brown in England, or if you're working for a kind of newer university, they all what are called polytechnics, which were kind of turned into universities around about 92, sometimes referred to as the post-92 universities, or some new universities like the one I work for, University of Lincoln, which were created after 1992. There's a difference in terms of prestige depending on which first types of university you work for. So obviously if you work for the University of Oxford, it's very prestigious. If you work for the University of Lincoln, like I do, a little bit less so. However, an interesting difference with the strike that's happened is that the strike is over pensions and a huge cut to pensions, academic staff pensions that the government has been imposed. But the government has only imposed that on those older, more established universities because they're actually in a different pension system. The newer universities, the old polytechnics, the newer universities which are much less prestigious, we share a pension scheme with teachers, secondary school teachers. So we're in the same pension scheme, and the government won't touch that pension scheme, or at least they haven't thus far, because the teachers are a militant SOBs. And so even though we are the less prestigious universities, because we happen to have share pensions with teachers, we're much more protected than people who are at the University of Oxford and Cambridge and so on. So it's kind of an interesting example of the craft unionism versus people being unions across, okay, it's education, but for different employers and in slightly different sectors that works quite well.
Was that pre and post 92? Was that a labor agreement that allowed for those two different classes of pension? Like, did they kill young women? That's a term we use, right? Everybody.
Oh, that's another workshop.
That's another workshop. It happens sometimes in labor agreements where the existing workers will say, okay, we're going to keep our stuff, but new workers will get something different. Right. That's what it sounds like happening.
So many states are trying to do here with public workers.
Right.
Tier
System.
Tier system, like you guys who are already in are good, but
Right.
people who come in after you are screwed. But don't
Right.
feel too bad about that.
That's true with all the academic pensions.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
United
It's
Yeah.
so
Well,
sad.
it's almost the opposite in Britain, in a way, because the new universities have better pensions than the old.
Right, but did they envision that kind of thing?
Well, possibly. I mean, it's a national contract. So for the post-92 universities, it's one contract for all of those universities. So it's quite a lot of universities, and it's one single contract, and it has to be, and it's one contract that everybody enters into with the government, which obviously is much more difficult to do in the US.
No, I mean, sorry, is public? Is it all public or private?
It's a public university.
Contract for all public universities.
Yeah, but this is the post-92 I'm talking about. With the other universities, I don't know if it works like that. I think the older universities so that might be another reason that their pension system isn't powerful. Possibly.
No, that's not right though. We have, there's a sort of a national, I can't remember what they call it, but it's a single pension scheme for all the green everybody. The USA.
Yeah, I'm talking about the contract rather than the pension scheme.
Oh, I see.
So the contract of employment that's signed.
Right,
I mean,
yeah.
I'm not sure because I don't work for them.
Yeah, no, that is with the institution.
Right, yeah, whereas the post-IT business is one contract for all of those.
Right.
So the contract is the same. One question I did have actually about the musicians, kind of thinking about this as a model for kind of the gig economy and the Starbucks workers, is with the musicians unions, they're organising, they're doing lots and lots of different jobs, but they're organising as musicians, presumably, so that's the point of unity that brings all of them together. Is that right? And if that is right, is that a slightly different situation to people in, lots of different types of service jobs who don't have that kind of one unifying thing to bring them together? Am I right?
Well, I mean, I think unified musicians are unified because they all play different instruments and they have all different.
Bass players are the best. I'm sorry.
You have feelings
Numbers
about
are there.
it. Just say have feelings, don't go there.
They're like, most union leaders are trumpet players, very arrogant.
Because they can't play a trumpet well, that's why they're using it.
No, I mean, I think there is that sort of thing, but it's such a solitary profession by definition, because you spend hours and hours and hours each day for years and years and years to develop this craft by yourself, and then you go out and you have to sell yourself.
Yeah, and there's a history of, I mean, it's the kind of quintessential craft union. You had to audition to get in the union for many years. And there was all this conflict with technology and new music. I mean, there's a whole book written about kind of the AFM experience with rock and roll. And, how they kept rock players out from the union because they weren't, properly trained as musicians. And there are other unions that have this kind of craft background. But it is a solitary thing. So it's a beautiful thing when they all come together and do collective work because they overcome all of that. A good example is all the major orchestras in the country are organized. And all the regional, I'm talking about classical. But in the 60s, they were some of the most exploited musicians in the entire world. And they fought their own union and fought their own players and got good contracts. And they became quite elitist, unfortunately, instead of learning lessons of this and making it a larger thing. But to give them credit, they have very, very good contracts and have been recognized as the trained workers and artists that they are. Right?
Yeah, and I think one of the, in terms of just, orchestras becoming more diverse and having women play, I mean, the union was instrumental in developing a system to make sure it was equal.
It was blind auditions, right?
Blind auditions, and so they put up a screen, literally a screen.
But they fought for that.
They fought for this, right? And so a person will come in and audition on whatever instrument, and they would be judged solely for the music. And it led to this revolutionary impact in the orchestra. Women were playing, right?
If you think of an orchestra as a
People of color.
medieval construct, right? There's the serfs and the lords. But it's also the closest thing we have to a shop, right? Because there's workers, and there's a foreman, and there's boss. And you're all there working together in the same place. It's very rare for musicians. And so in that way, they were able to mobilize in collective action. One of the things about the audition was really interesting. At one point, they knew who the women were because they came in behind wheels.
So it's different, like,
So they stopped the sound. Because they were going, I want some women, and we don't want women. So they did. But these were musicians who were really, really militant about this stuff. So,
When did these changes happen?
But actually, even in the early 80s, there were still conflicts about screens. Some orchestras were still denying that. There was still, when I first came in, there was still some of that. But think about it again as the shop. It's a different formation than what a lot of unions go. The AFM is very organized. Broadway, orchestras, the old commercial jingles, the many of the theaters, the places where musicians really are closer to a shop. The challenge is all the independent musicians who are the majority, who are the ones who are really moving the industry, are not fitting into that structure. That could be one of the conversations, but I think that's part of what we're raising here is that, you go along with time, and if you here, if every time technology changes, you kind of just cozy up to the employer, the labels, whatever, you're going to wind up where we are now, which in fact, it used to be that a musician could work half the time live, half the time recording, and make a living. Well, now they work half the time live, but because of streaming, what's happened there, they're not getting compensated properly, they're actually getting ripped off in every single way. Copyright violations, everything, they can't make that living. You know, there are musicians say, I had 1 million hits in my last tune and I got paid $200. So it's a structural issue, so we take it over 3 workshops. But I think, as Maggie said, that's kind of the major issues here about, you know, those
I
struggles.
always respond again to a little bit. I think one of the issues in the way people in labor talk about some of this stuff is it's like we have 2 models, right? We have the AFL and we have the IWW, right? The problem is that there are other models that may be working better. I'm actually around some of these issues much more sympathetic with the old Knights of Labor model, which had a number of different ways of organizing. They had shops, they had industrial locals, they had geographic locals that were multi-craft, right? And they had locals in very small towns. America was not a urban country when the Knights were setting out. They had the town I grew up in, which was actually, you know, a separate town from Boston, although it became much more suburban, had 5 locals in the Knights of Labor. Because there was a group here, there was a group here, and there was this kind of industrial, and they had people with traveling cars, right? And the notion of, and so yes, there's a difference between all musicians are the same, and Starbucks workers aren't, and the issues of aspirations are not making it complicated. But if there was a traveling card for workers in the gig economy, so that everybody who's in the section, this is what I do. I'm an Uber driver. I work nighttime in the coffee center, I wait tables, whatever, but I have a card, and having this card means that every employer I go to has to abide by certain standards. And every employer I go to has to pay its benefit funds. And that card, listen, with computerization, this is really easy. I think the Knights did it when they were still writing with quill pens, right? But with computerization, you check in. Right? I'm working here. This employer gets charged for my health care. Right? This person, so that the model, I think that we have to be much more flexible in models to think about, one of the things that I've been interested in, we've kind of been talking about doing it on my campus, 40% of the students on my campus are working 30 hours or more, right? In my book, that's working full time, right? So, but you can't organize because, let's say they're working at the mall, they're working in retail, which is one of the largest employers of young workers, because the courts have ruled that malls are private property, and that they can make rules about distributing literature, right? And this came up actually legally during the struggle against the Iraq War when peace organizations tried to get into malls and claiming they were public spaces, and that's what the First Amendment was meant for, and the courts generally ruled in the mall's favor. So what are we going to do? We can't go there to organize. Well, throw up our hands, or realize that an important proportion of these young workers are at one of the last surviving places of almost free speech. Campuses. Organize them on campus. Right? So that we can say whatever we want. I can hold a meeting and say, I want to organize a union that's going to yell at the boss and go on strike immediately, and nobody can stop me. Nobody can stop me, because everything is covered under a different series of laws that have been fought for around academic freedom. So I can call for sabotage. I can do whatever I want on campus. So if all I'm saying is sign a card, join a union, there's nothing you can do. So one of the ways of getting at this diversity of workers is saying not be tied to trying to hand out leaflets outside the mall because nobody's going to take them, but say you can have a meeting in the cafeteria at lunchtime and we've tried to do this, but we've had we weren't consistent of worker-student organization, student worker organization, saying you're a student and you're also working. What can we do? And there are campus issues as well as issues on the job.
but also they're moving, right? One week they're working at Starbucks, the next at the Gap, and the next they're at Urban Outfitters, and next they're taking a couple weeks off because they're, going to visit their mom in Michigan, or their girlfriend's going to visit her mom in Tennessee. So they're very casual, but if they're carrying their card and we have legal and which needs political protection for that card, they can go to work anywhere.
And this is not a new concept.
No, it's not.
I mean, not only the nights, but unions that are now organizing communities away from the work site, because the work site is so dangerous. I mean, we do this naturally. With musicians, you're not going to go, you're not going to walk into the club and say, hey! Or, like, let's go.
You might walk in the club, right?
But I went hey too much and I got in trouble. But the idea of looking again at workers to be part of a larger community, where do they go, where do they study, all of that. Successful unions that are organizing now are doing that, kind of just absolutely in the same approach.
And we've been doing it. Unions have been doing it.
Yeah, well, and if you're thinking about the adjunct situation, the transportability of some sort of car where every university you work for pays into a fund that's responsible for your health care and your benefits and whatever. And it struck me when we were talking about sort of the until job, like these students see themselves, I'm doing this until, and I thought, the person who's waiting tables to make it as an actor or an actress or whatever. Adjuncts are already doing their job.
Right.
They're doing the job they trained to do that they want to do, but under really shitty conditions, not of their own choosing. So it's a different.
And I don't even want to do research, right? I want to teach, right?
Yeah.
So
That's
that's how I
community college, you'll get teaching coming after.
Right.
Yeah. And I'll just sort of, because I think in the entertainment industry, at least, and I can't go too much into our organizing strategy. Because I'm on camera, but we've wrestled with this question of people doing similar work for different employers, but a little bit in different, right? Moving around, right? We invented the thing, right? That's probably why they're taking it, And so, thinking about, and this is a power analysis, and this is why, strategic research is critical to any organizing campaign. Who are the employers? What's going on, right? It's qualitative, it's quantitative. What are the workers saying? Where's the money going? And this takes years and years to do, but we've done it in certain sectors where we don't have density. And instead of saying, we're going to go on strike, right? And saying, and that's a really important distinction, right? So that card that Paul's talking about becomes a real thing, right? And that you organize employers, you don't get the traditional thing, this is a profession. All right, so Stony Brook University, we've identified as being the worst offender of adjunct faculty. Don't know if that's true, but
We think it might be
right? But we know that there's this community of universities in the area, and there are 200 adjuncts that are doing this, right? And we say, all right, everybody, and this takes years, right? And then it's traditional organizing. They're identifying leaders. They're in every community there are, right? And we talk to folks, and we say, what if fall 2020, nobody accepts it?
So,
How fast will they come to the table?
and so
And it works.
And where the employer is goading us to strike, because they know that's a mission of weakness for us, and we think the strike is the ultimate. Well, there's something to say about that, but in this case, it's an example of where you don't want to go there. You've done the research, and you have the leadership development, because, most of organizing is identifying and developing leaders, then you have the ability and the power to move this stuff, right? To really move it in a way. I think, as Paul was saying about organizing employers, but we're also organizing workers in this way.
Well, it's also turning the independent contractors against that. No, we're not on strike. We're just not accepting your offer of employment, which you have the perfect legal right to do.
And within that, we're saying this is what our power is. We are that
So
power.
you're going to call us contract and independent workers. Cool. We're not taking your work anymore, but not individually.
Yeah, and the university can't function without it.
No.
Right. It's a house of cards.
Exactly.
It usually is.
Now, I worked, this this might be a I was a union organizer for nurses for 3 years. And
Oh,
this,
which year? Do you mind?
the Ohio Nurses Association. Now, this might be a downfall of that, like how I was taught, but I was of the understanding, and this has always puzzled me about trade unions. I was of the understanding that you had to base your contracts around specific workplaces. How? Yeah. See, that's the like. How does that fit in? Yeah. How does
Because
that fit in with the NLRA?
Who are working in the South, just come under their agreement.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
but where there
Right,
are,
and there's somebody.
but if you had, for example, there was a single standing hospital, which is very rare now.
Right.
You could make the argument that's the employer, you can organize that. But now, again, the research will show these are multinational, layered conglomerates that you have to understand, if you even understand as you get down the layers who the employer is. And when you do that, you could do more of a regional,
Yeah.
cross-section kind of contract, even if they're pushing you up. Right?
So you could hypothetically organize a university or a healthcare system or whatever, so that you have teachers or nurses or whatever with their cards to say, okay,
But you're not organizing you organize the workers to have cards.
right,
So if you say, if there's going to be an adjunct union for the New York region,
right,
okay?
right.
So that you would organize Hofstra as well as Stony Brook. You'd organize City as well as NYU. Anybody who's working as an adjunct has the right to join this union. You're not essentially, you're not doing an industrial model where you're pushing to sit down with a particular employer. You're saying to the employing class as a whole,
Right.
we as workers won't work for under this. And what's interesting is that the origins of trade unionism,
It's a guild structure.
that's what it is. This is how the carpenters did. We're going to go on the work site, and there are 5 of us with cards, and there are 25 carpenters.
Yeah.
And what we do is we go to the other carpenters and say, we don't want to work here unless he pays us union wages. And you can't use their methods of convincing recalcitrant workers, because universities are a little bit more polite. But the way the carpenters did is they say, hi guys, this is now a union site. Sign it. The Wobblies did the same thing. The Wobbly organizers went on the freight cars, going to the agricultural fields. Everybody who wouldn't sign cars was thrown off. By the time the freight trains got to the fields, everybody was a union member. The Wobbly guy went to the farmer and said, okay, these are our terms for taking this job. We can go back the way we came. But your crops die in a week, right? So it's organizing workers, but it's not tied. I think we have to see the model in which the UAW and the steelworkers organize as being, that's what's historically specific. The other methods of organizing workers, that's why, this notion of a precariat I've often been very skeptical of, because in fact, in capitalism before unions, all workers were precarious. So this notion that, look at what was life like in Detroit on the Ford assembly line prior to the union effort. It's another thing about almost 100% turnover. The lines were terrible. 45% of women with children were living on their own because their husbands had either died on the job or had taken off because the line was killing them. So talk about precarity. So we think of that the way it was talked about by the right-wing research, the privileged workers of the UAW. The only way that job became bearable is when the union came in. So that could be true also with this new generation of precarious workers. When they say, but you know who were the most revolutionary workers group in Republican Spain in the 1930s? The cafe waiters union. That's where revolutionary cells were organized. That's where the theoreticians met. So what's to stop other sectors of workers taking a militant role in revitalizing American labor, and especially with young workers? There are going to be no more young UAW members. It's like there are no more young UMW members, in my mind, right? They're fighting for pensions, they're fighting for retirements, but they're not fighting for a generation of young workers. So where are those workers? And how do we reach them? We need to take into account the new economy, right?
And you would think that if one of the unions that would certainly be able to deal with a traveling car with the musicians.
Right.
And quite the contrary, the resistance inside. No, you're part of the national local, you gotta be part of the New York local getting fired, LA local. It was a big fight inside.
They created the traveling card in the beginning, right?
Exactly. So it goes against everything, but it's part of that whole, not only is it guild craft mentality, but it's what the boss wants. It's how we do business. We can do business better this way if the national, boss is really looking at this, instead of saying, I gotta deal with everybody who comes from Nationals Union. No, I'm and so that is kind of a.
I also think it works for skilled workers. I think the fact, tenure track, tenured faculty have that, we would also be able to carry our rights with us, right? My son is just starting his career as a tenure track faculty member, right? They are being screwed, right? Not screwed like workers are screwed. I know the perspective, but what he was promised versus what he's going to get. And the Americans have to get over our hyper-democracy about levels of skill. And yes, there are workers who are going to be paid more. They have high levels of skill. They deserve it, right? We're not that kind of primitive egalitarians where we foresee a society in which everybody's the same. It's silly, it's impossible, and it's wrong-headed. So there are going to be differentials of skill. There are going to be differentials of pay. The question is who gets to determine that is where the question is whether it's the bosses or the workers. Now, it does work. I was at Boston University for graduate school when we had such a terrible employer that he managed to drive each of the 4 unions out on strike at the same time. It was a level of genius that you could not. The faculty went on strike. The maintenance and tech went on strike. The secretaries went on strike. I mean, it's like each sector that was organized went on strike at the same time. And he did what he could to try to divide the faculty from the secretaries. The secretaries were the maintenance workers, clerical, technical but there are documentary evidence that these 4 sectors were out of work on the same time on the same picket line. So, but each of those 4 unions had very different character because they did reflect what the different work was. The full-time faculty, when the first thing is they offered a compromise to full-time faculty, and there were 5 faculty refused to cross the secretary's picket line. And one of them being Howard Zinn, and the others were his friends, but essentially Howard Zinn was the political science department. They refused to give Xerox paper to the political science department until Howard retired 6 years later. I mean, they were really, but.
It's like the state of Illinois where they reduced the education budget by exactly Karen Cox's salary. Because he was such a thorn in their sides. Yeah.
But they won.
Oh, to be so famous.
So we are technically out of time,
Yes.
but do we want to, and then we can probably take one more question if you want to. Okay, you want to quickly?
Yeah,
Yes.
I was just going to say in terms of these models of organising various workers in the gig economy, it's worth looking at the examples of the UK. So there's 2 unions, I think neither of them more than a few years old, the United Voices of the World and Independent Workers of Great Britain. And they've been organising crew drivers and couriers and outsourced staff in various places. And they're getting huge victories, not just in individual workplaces, but legally as well. There's been a big case recently to challenge this idea that these people are self-employed, right? They're contractors. And there's a weird legal status in the UK that I'm not sure you have here, which is between employee and contractor, worker. And they won the case to get gig employees recognised as workers. It's going through appeals now at the moment. I'm not sure where it is exactly, but that's huge, right?
Yes.
And also, maybe we don't have time, but I was going to ask, in the context of what we've been talking about, as someone who doesn't know a load about it, whether you have any comments on the recent sort of wildcat strikes of teachers in West Virginia and elsewhere.
The South is organizing. That is some baller shit.
Yeah.
Can we quote you on that? Get that down. That was all I agree. It was all the shit.
A group of workers in the public sector who do not have the right to collectively bargain or strike like that.
Right.
In the southern states of the United States. I mean, it's amazing. As an organizer, I'm like, whoa, what just happened there?
Right. And the misnomer is that it wasn't a wildcat strike because They were not
They were
union.
organized.
They're not allowed
They
to be
organized
union.
themselves.
Right, they're not unions.
They're teaching the labor movement like a real
Right.
lesson right now. Like,
Bullshit, that's what's happening. No, it's right.
But what
It
does that
can't-
say
it
about the
can't
unions that
collectively-
should be representing teachers?
Right. I mean, you know, they have like loose organizations, you know, the MEA and the AFT were hurting to get up in there, but like, I mean, these are a group of people, workers who, you know, were just beaten. Here, they were blamed for the recession in 2008. They were blamed because, you know, kids are shooting up schools. They're blamed, you know, because of
The opiate
bullying and
addiction.
that, right?
They're
The
blamed for the
opiate
opiate
addiction,
addiction.
right? They haven't had raises and their pensions are being cut. What did they think was gonna happen? People are always self-organized, especially workers. They're always organized. As organizers, we go in and we figure out how to organize. That's it.
The only caution I would do about when you say what the rest of the union was doing, just the legal restrictions on American labor, and particularly for the UK, it's really hard. When I remember going to the UK and meeting labor activists, and they say, "What's wrong with you guys?" So I said, "When was the last time somebody was killed on a picket line in Britain?" This was before Thatcher. And they said, "Oh yeah, we mark it every year. It was in 1873, and everybody comes out with their banners." I said, so it was a Monday night school last week. The level of just gross repression visited against American workers and unions is unrivaled in the developed world. We are a third world petty dictatorship in terms of labor relations, right? When I was coming up, the country was filled with union activists who had been blacklisted, right? Gave their lives for labor and just were puttering along, right? Never recovered from it. So yes, there are serious limitations to what American labor has done, but the struggle to hold on to legalization is not something to be, sanguine about. We are always on the edge of illegalization, and we were legalized very late. Britain trade unions were legalized by the turn of the 20th century. It took another 30 years for them to be legalized in the United States. The rest of Europe was post-fascism. So, and then with very serious restrictions, right? Imported in Western Europe our model, which is the most militant of the trade union by definition, right? So there's structure, and then Taft-Hartley, which forbids certain kinds of labor activity. So yes, the union leaders are slow, but they're slow because they're very tied to a legal framework, which always was bad and now is really deadly to us, I think.
and these workers just prove that.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Amazing,
I
right?
mean, they proved it. I mean, it's, public sector is where they did something else. It's different law. Right? And which is why, as the private sector is tanked and the public sector has stayed stable, and now the Republicans are threatening it with the Supreme Court case, will be decided any day now.
Yes.
Yes. Which will eliminate the ability for public sector labor unions to have dues deduction in collective bargaining.
It's right to work for public
It's
sector.
right to work national. And the next it's going to be right to work in the private sector, right? And so I think what these teachers have done is said, okay, great, right? You don't want to give me the ability to collectively bargain and have binding arbitration and have a process in which my wages and working conditions are guaranteed and protected, then kids aren't going to school. I mean,
That was the bargain, right?
That's
You got some legality, but you gave up a lot. Okay, if you're gonna take that modicum of legality away, what's to stop workers from doing what they do?
And the Republicans made it gamble. They made it gamble that working people would take it, right? Because it's a country obsessed with individualism. And I think just the strain on working people that's been going on, the austerity measures since the 80s,
Yeah.
right? Exacerbated in 2008. It's coming to a head, and I think it's just a ticking time bomb.
And what these educators have done should inspire the adjuncts.
Yeah.
I mean, among other workers.
I mean, they got 6% raises, boom, in a week.
And West Virginia, no surprise, coal mine country.
There's
Long history. There are a lot of those people came from union families, and they
wore
knew
the red scarves of the May 1 strike into teacher strike because the grandparents were in the coal mines. So they know their own history.
I would say also, by the way, that this is very, very much gendered.
My luggage.
This was also very gendered strike, right? Because these were women teachers. And they seem to be more willing to take on this stuff outside of the limits of labor law than other sectors do. Nurses have also, by the way, they're most mills.
Yeah, well, some nurses are.
That's right.
I'm no longer an employee.
Okay, we have 10 fingers.
The National Nurses Union has done it very well. The American Nurses Association is going to get
Well, that is. We're looking for that is the way it is. Right?
Thank you to our panelists.
Thank you.
for-
Thank you.
Thank you.